Hi, I'm Phil Flanagan Cox, and I am have been a member of St. John's for about 7 years now, and I recently attended my first General Assembly.
My name is Nat Kutcher. I have been a member of St. John's for a little over a month, and this was also my first GA.
I'm Edie Holder, and I've been a member of St. John's for more than 30 years. And I had the good fortune of getting to sign Matt Kutcher's membership papers because Matt didn't go to church. So welcome, Matt and Nat. So,
Your fourth GA, right?
This is my fourth GA. So our subject is colonialism, and a definition is, and the reason for this is if we had attended in Providence, Rhode Island, they were going to do a celebration of 400 years since the first Europeans came to North America. And they had in the programming, there were some rituals from the Wampanoag in some of the services, and then also a discussion of what the impact of Europeans arriving on the shores. And the topic is settler colonialism. So a definition is settler colonialism is an ongoing system of power that perpetuates the genocide and repression of indigenous peoples and cultures. It normalizes continuous settler occupation, exploiting lands and resources. It includes interlocking forms of oppression, including racism, white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, and capitalism. Settler colonialism is a system, not a historical event. And we'd like to think, or some people like to think, well, that was all in the past. But it has affected our culture and our society. And a relevant example is, why is Christianity more valued than the lore from Native Americans or from Africa? Why are those stories not as important or not looked at with this in the same light as biblical?
Yeah, so that definition that Edie read was shared at one of the workshops I attended at GA. And I'd heard the term settler colonialism before, but I had been thinking of it as a historical event and not as an ongoing force. So that was really eye-opening for me to think about not just this land was stolen, but this land is occupied, and that our whole system of government and laws and borders and land ownership is all imported through settler colonialism.
Mm-hmm. And I didn't attend that particular workshop in person, but I really appreciate the fact that all of the presentations, workshops, speaker engagements were recorded. And so I am able to go back and review some of that information, and even just having the opportunity to chat with Nat and other St. Johners that attended and sharing their takeaways. I've been able to kind of percolate that idea of colonization being an ongoing process. So I really appreciate that we were able to exchange ideas and that I have some time to review the materials from GA, because they had some phenomenal speakers. Like, I was so impressed.
So the land around here has had many indigenous tribes on it. The Adena Hopewell culture goes back a long ways, and they're the ones that created Serpent Mound and the what's the name? Fort Ancient. And then more recently, there were the Shawnee, the Miami, and the Osage tribes.
Yeah. So I asked one of the authors one of the speakers, who's an author and academic, Dina Julia Whitaker. I asked her what we can do here in the US to fight settler colonialism. And she said that she used the word decolonize, which I thought was great. Because when I thought about my question, I was even like, the US, that's a very, what can we do here in the US? That's a very settler colonial definition of where we are. And so she used the word decolonize, and she said the biggest part of decolonizing this land is land back. And one of the other activists one of the other Indigenous activists who was a speaker also talked about land back. And I can't remember who said it, but someone said, I go to these protests and I see these signs that say, this is stolen land. Well, we need to give it back. And that was really challenging for me to hear the first time. And I thought immediately, like, that's not practical. But after I got to sit with it for a couple of hours and a couple of days, I was like, well, why don't I think that's practical? Is it because I have been, I've grown up in this settler colonial system, and I've grown up thinking of my country as America, and that it's not possible for us to have any other systems of government or systems of land stewardship. So
I think that's an idea that when you shared it with me at our meeting, our little St. John's GA meeting, that was something, that was an aha moment for me. And I have to admit, I've always felt kind of gross about owning land. I owned land as recently as earlier this year. And even in my thoughts of owning land in the future, or at least, having a place to kind of live and settle, the fact that all of this land in North America was taken from people. So even if I were to acquire land, it's not really my land. And Indigenous people, for the most part, did not believe in owning the land. They kept the land or were stewards of the land. And so that's something that I'm definitely going to be cognizant of. And like Nat mentioned, it's kind of hard to imagine our systems being different because this is all we know. But there is a more just way, and change is hard. So it would involve a lot of change. But, justice is worth adapting to.
Yeah, that's so beautiful.
So in the last few months before we shut down, the Native American Coalition of Cincinnati or something.
Yeah, Greater Cincinnati, yes.
Greater Cincinnati came to our church, and we did a split the plate. And one thing we can do is try to figure out how to work closer with them when we open up for the pandemic. And in closing, Matt, why don't you tell us the story about Turtle Land?
Turtle Island was a new term that I had not heard before GA, and I heard a couple of people talk about like something happening on Turtle Island, and I was like, I don't know where that is. Like, is that on the East Coast? Is that on the West Coast? Where is Turtle Island? And I looked it up, and Turtle Island is here. It's where we live. So Turtle Island is a different name for North America because the name North America is a settler colonial name. So it's a name that Indigenous activists have come up with from Indigenous stories to describe this land where we live. And I think it's a beautiful name.
The story is basically that North America was built on the back of a big, huge turtle. And the turtle helped bring up dirt, soil from the water and piled it on the back of the shell, and that produced our land. So there's a piece of lore right there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I also wanted to share, like Phyllis was talking about her feelings of personal land ownership. I've never owned land, but it is like a possibility, and I feel similarly weird about it. But land that we own, all of us, because we're all members of St. John's, is the land that our building is on. And one of the conversations that happened in one of the workshops was, can our congregations decolonize? And can one of the Indigenous activists, Lola Cowboy Giron, she said, can you imagine UUs being the first, like, leading the land back movement? And she said, like, oh, I feel chills just imagining that. And I thought that was so cool that we could think about, like, that we have this opportunity to be a part of creating a better future.
So thank you for joining us, and we'll leave you with that question. Decolonization, how can we apply it?